everybody. I'm Allison Levine. For those of you who don't know me, I teach in the French department here at UVA. And it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce our next speaker today. I'm really excited about this talk. Julie Sykes comes to us from the University of Oregon, where she's the director of the Center for Applied Second Language Studies. Before that, she earned her PhD from Minnesota. She's also worked at the University of New Mexico. And Julie is the author of the 2012 book that you may know, Language at Play, Digital Games in Second and Foreign Language Teaching and Learning, as well as a special issue of Language Learning and Technology entitled Game and Play Activity in Technology-Mediated L2 Teaching and Learning in 2014. She also has an edited volume on technology and interlanguage pragmatics research and teaching, and that's 2013. Now, I won't read you Julie's entire CV. She has an impressive lineup of published articles and book chapters spanning the fields of second language acquisition, pragmatics, online gaming, place-based, and hands-on learning. But here's one detail that would make me really proud. I wish that I, like Julie, had published an article in Japanese. So Julie's article, Digital Games in Second Language Pragmatic Acquisition, appeared in Japanese in Topics in Japanese SLA. Julie is also the principal investigator on several major nationally funded grant projects, including 2 grants linked to the Language Flagship Program through the National Security Education Program, as well as major funding for her center as a Department of Education Title VI National Language Resource Center, and this funding goes through 2018. She also spearheads some really exciting projects involving project-based learning in second language. And one of these I wanted to tell you about, it's called EcoPod. It's a residential language immersion program at the University of Oregon in which students play a place-based augmented reality game. They have to engage in modules requiring them to use both language and content expertise to solve problems, find collaborators, and build community. And the problems include surviving a pandemic, collaborating to save the population of their residence hall from genocide, and ensuring dormitory sustainability. They do this for an entire year in Chinese, French, German, Japanese, and Spanish. Another of her projects is Games to Teach, an international collaborative project among foreign language educators designing games for foreign language instruction. The title of Julie's talk today is Transforming Second Language Teaching and Learning, Place, Space, and Design. Please join me in giving Professor Julie Sykes a warm welcome.
All right, thank you all, and thank you for an invitation from Martin and the entire team here. It's been such a warm welcome and delighted to be here. It's not often someone just sets you up to give a talk right before you talk, so thank you to David for I don't have to do any of the theoretical work. What he calls persistence, my colleague Steve Thorne and I call effortful engagement. They are essentially the same thing, getting people to pay attention to the world in which they're living. And the importance of that both for foreign language acquisition and as well as cross-interdisciplinary work that connects the kinds of things we do in the human experience, language being one of them, but all kinds of other disciplines as well. The other thing I want to say is none of this happens in isolation. I've been really, really fortunate to work with teams of amazing people. Our team at Castles is phenomenal. We couldn't do this kind of work alone. Anyone who tells you they can, they're wrong. And you shouldn't listen and you should run the other way. This kind of building and design requires the intense collaboration around human communication that has to happen and that we're trying to instill in our learners all the time. So starting out with 3 critical premises. 1, the world is dynamic. The tools I'm going to show you, the games I'm going to show you, come out of our work in the last couple of months. It's always changing. We have to believe in the idea that everything is co-constructed and dynamic. Thus, we are building skills. We're building dynamic procedural knowledge, both around technology but also around language learning. There's a long, long story back in the farmlands of Iowa. Anyone know what happened when they first brought the car to the Midwest? No? Anyone know? Everyone tore the car apart and turned them into farming machinery, right? No one drove cars as they intended them to drive. Instead, they tore them apart and turned them into something else, which co-constructed the whole idea of building farm machinery. So instead of car manufacturers saying, no, 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 you need to drive cars, you need to drive cars, they said, you need to drive cars, and you should drive cars over here with a tractor and with the kind of farm machinery that we're seeing today. And so this whole idea is that behavior co-constructs. The huge iPhone screens, there's a reason we have those now. It's because people started changing what they do with their smartphones. It's not because someone wanted some new tool to work with. 2, language learning is ultimately about human connection. The moment we forget that in any classroom, we have forgotten our entire objective. As a field, we are moving in the direction of too much assessment that's outside of human connection. The goal is to not get rid of assessment, I actually say more assessment, but in the areas that look at the intricate, detailed difficulties of what human connection looks like. The most recent example, I happen to be an Oregon Ducks fan. When you live in Eugene, Oregon, it's actually an impossibility not to at least pay attention to the Ducks. We're at a football game. We happened to lose in double overtime. Anyone a football fan and was maybe excited? It was tough, tough loss. Like it, don't like sports, it doesn't matter. The whole point is I sent a text message to a friend of mine 3 rows in front of us at the game, and it said, ugh. And he wrote back and said, yep. Imagine the complexity of social interaction in those tiny little 2 utterances, right? The tiny little idea that you need to share knowledge, that you need to think about all the things that are happening in daily interaction. I'm really interested in that piece for language learners and how that happens cross-culturally. More specifically, things like refusals of invitations and assistance. How many times are you needing to insist for it actually to count? For things like when learners come from all over places in the United States, or all over places in the world to the United States, and everyone's so nice, and then they get here and we say something like, yeah, we should go for a cup of coffee sometime. And we never actually invite them for coffee. Why? Because, oh, we should have coffee sometime doesn't actually mean I'm inviting you for coffee, right? What it actually means is I have interest in getting to know you and seeing you somewhere on the street so we can greet each other, right? And all these ideas about how meaning, even with perfect structure, can be miscommunicated quite clearly and quite differently. What's really hard about that is human connection's impossible to isolate down into one model. Right? It's impossible to isolate into something that says this is right and this is wrong because we don't know, right? That's sort of the struggle of the human condition. And what does that look like cross-culturally and how do we work with that? And so my goal is to think about learning models that require time on task and persistence around these particular issues to make learning relevant to their students. And some of the tools we're going to talk about today are entirely designed to do that. The reason I absolutely love technology has absolutely nothing to do with technology itself. It has to do with the fact that now we have tools to deal with this complexity in ways we couldn't before. Through big data, through analytics, through individualized experiences. It's the reason I'm interested in games is you can do anything in a game and you can mess with it and you can use that as a way to fundamentally change the learning experience. The third assumption, tools are just tools. And I put just in parentheses because I don't want to underemphasize the critical nature of a tool, right? Tools, having the right tool is critical. A hammer to hammer in a nail, a lever, all kinds of tools are really important. But tools used poorly are worse than no tools at all. And so we have to be really cautious of how we talk about technology and how we talk about those tools in really making these pieces move forward. Something I'm very careful of is liking things or using tools just because they look cool, just because they have fancy pictures, just because they're sort of the newest and latest, greatest thing on BuzzFeed or Huffington Post, right? All the things that we sort of follow. One example I want to give you, and please don't cringe as language educators, is Duolingo. It's really fun. Time on task, and we're talking about getting learners out there doing lexical one-to-one. My concern, does everyone know what Duolingo is? It's essentially gamification of the acquisition of flashcards, right? When we talk about games, it's really different than the type of games I'm going to talk about today. My concern with Duolingo isn't that it's a bad thing for students to do. It's certainly not going to hurt them. The more time they spend on that, great, I'm all for it. But I don't want them to stop there. I don't want them to say one-to-one word translation is what you need to do. Great, you're at level 300. But all you know how to do is translate words back and forth, and you have this idea that the same word means this one thing all the time. When we absolutely know the same word, while yes, there are commonalities and marked and non-marked differences, the reality is they don't actually mean anything until they're in a context of social interaction. So I need to build skills in my learners, that we all need to think about how we enable a learner to be able to do that, right, when they get with people. To read a scenario and say, ooh, I'm doing something that's not feeling right, or ooh, did they take my apology? What's hard is that's just hard, even in our first language, right? And so then how do we help build that knowledge in our second language and work for that? To me, technology lets us do that. But I also see it inhibit the ideas around when commercial companies, for example, are building tools for language learning, it's always flashcards. If you look at the number 100 apps on the App Store, it's almost essentially translation and fill in the blank. And so I want us to be really cautious of which ones of those are helpful and which ones are not. And so those are the things I'm not going to talk about. It doesn't mean there's not value in them. If your learners find a way to stay on task, if it motivates them, absolutely. But I think we can do more than that. Right? I've seen it happen. Our data is really clear that we can push these boundaries in ways that we couldn't before because we can leverage technology. And today we're going to do that in 3 ways. We're going to look at 3 particular pedagogical transformations that in other disciplines we have much stronger evidence, but we're starting to see a pretty good body of evidence in language acquisition as well. The first is rethinking place and space. Where do we typically learn languages in the United States? How does it happen? Take 20 seconds, sit down, draw a picture of what a language learning context looks like. No one's doing it. It's not rhetorical. 20 seconds. Active, engagement, fun, play, it matters. Draw your picture. You only have 10 seconds left. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How many of you have something that looks like a classroom? With a teacher wall, with a projector, right? With desks. I mean, in general, we have an idea of what a classroom space looks like. What's the problem? 95% of all language interactions don't happen in those spaces, right? They happen in restaurants, they happen in airplanes, they happen in conference rooms. They happen in all kinds of different places. And so what we're doing is saying, learn language here, learn language in this context, and just go apply it to all these millions of other things. What technology can allow us to do is actually reuse place, right? Intense context. Some colleagues, John Hellerman and Steve Thorne and mine at Portland State, are looking at really carefully the close ideas around intense context. In other words, place-based augmented reality. The use of mobile devices to enhance the experience that learners have in the space we're living. Has anyone looked up a restaurant on Yelp? Anyone used a Google map from getting from current location to somewhere, or maps on your phone? Anyone said, gas station nearby, click? That's place-based augmented reality. That is overlaying technology on the world in which you're living to interact with a place more intimately and more carefully than you would do otherwise. And so what we can do is take advantage of those behaviors and those contexts to create learning opportunities. In their case, what they do is they send learners all over Portland State University in 10 different languages and look at sustainability on campus. They have to save the world from the future past. They're in the future and they have to save the past world through sustainability. And in doing so, they visit the rainwater tower on campus. They look at the eco-friendly building. It's Portland, right? That's what we do in Oregon. They look at all where the recycling occurs, where it goes, what happens. And then they come back and they talk about sustainability and content, both in their target language as well as in their native language, and start thinking about how those factors interrelate. In essence, language becomes part of that environment. And a project I did when I was at the University of New Mexico with Chris Holden as co-PI, we built a game called Mentira. Mentira is a murder mystery, place-based augmented reality game designed to get learners out into Spanish-speaking neighborhoods of Albuquerque, New Mexico. One of our fundamental pedagogical problems was that learners would come to my office as the director of the language program there, and they would say, Julie, you know, I really, really want to go abroad because I need to go somewhere where people actually speak Spanish. Take a deep breath. I would count to 5 and say, well, you know, Spanish is the second official language of New Mexico. I bet we could find someone here, right? But this idea of how learners are not seeing language in their own space. And so we said, let's get them out of here. Let's get them out of the campus. Let's get them walking around. Let's get them out of schools, into parks, into museums, into places. And in our case, we chose a neighborhood about 10 minutes from the university, available by public bus, where they had to solve a murder mystery, a fictional, historical fiction novel. So they choose, it's also designed around pragmatic learning objectives in which all the grammar, structure, correct, accurate, ideally authentic, whatever that means, but also pragmatically quite different. So each family has a different idea about how you should interact. So for example, one patriarch expects very much long, structured, mitigated utterances, where another family, the matriarch of that family, is like, no, direct, do not waste my time. And so we help them explore how to be effective interactants with these fictional family members. So they choose in the classroom. You can see this is a really traditional classroom space, right? These are my awesome Spanish 202 students when I was at the University of New Mexico, and Juan Carlos, the professor. And we're, you know, they picked to be part of that. The Apodaca family has different characteristics, their family history, and we use that to build some socio-pragmatic competence around what they're doing. Then they go home. This is Chris playing at home. He has to be part of it, right? It's one of our projects. But, and we have a narrative overlaid of places where they visit, they meet up with people, much like a traditional video game kind of role play space. Then the key piece, place-based augmented reality. They go out into Griegos neighborhood, and they have to go to 6 different sites, each of which has historical significance. One happened to be a store, the only store in all of Albuquerque that sold alcohol during Prohibition. Another happens to be a dance hall where people gathered. And so we've put a layer of folklore mixed into sort of these clues. And what they have to do then as a group is negotiate meaning. Really typical classroom task, right? Find 5 places on a map. Every one of you have done something like that in a classroom. In this essence, these places are real places. They have historical, cultural significance in the local place. They then go, they type in their clue, and based on which family they get, it works much like a traditional information gap task, in which different clues for different families and different pragmatic abilities. If you're really bad at pragmatics, you don't get very many clues, because you can't talk to people, right? If you're really good, they tell you all kinds of family secrets. And so we're dynamically constructing for them this interaction. Then at the end, what they do, we built 100 different game endings. We iterated, we tried all kinds of data. They hated them all. One of the hard parts about being game design teachers is students are really, really, really demanding of good game experiences, right? So I don't know how to end this. And so we asked them, what do we do? They're like, well, it's a murder. There's always a trial. We don't actually ever know who's innocent or guilty. And so it was a brilliant idea that came out from this student design piece, right? And what we do now is they build a trial, they mount a trial. We have no idea who's going to be found innocent or guilty. And it fits with all the intermediate high proficiency level markers that we want them to do. Hypothesize, defend an opinion, create a clue, right? It's what we as language educators want to happen all the time anyway. The students are so into it, right? And they work together and they build their clues, and then you win or you lose, right? And at the end, you're sad or happy, and it kind of depends. Lots of data on this. The most clear outcome is that place matters. Everyone always asks, well, couldn't you just play this without actually going to the neighborhood? And what we found is that no, it actually does not have the same impact without spending those 2 hours on a field trip in the neighborhood, because you don't feel it, you don't see it, you don't get this enhanced context the way that you do. Those of you who live in other places, not quite as easy to do this as Albuquerque, right? There are all kinds of really cool things you can do around museums, around food culture, around connections of socioeconomics and politics and food, around pandemic survival, which is what we're working on in Eugene right now. I'll show you that in a minute. The idea is to think about, outside of the language I'm teaching, how does this connect to the rest of the world? How is this relevant? Is it mostly relevant in hospitals? Okay, then I'm going to send them to hospitals and do interviews and maybe play a game. Can you figure out where this deadly germ is coming from? Who knows what that looks like, right? The great news is you don't have to be a game designer. You don't have to be a programmer. you can build this or something maybe not quite so complicated, but you could build a scavenger hunt, a place-based augmented reality experience tomorrow if you wanted to. This is a platform called ARIS. It comes out of the University of Wisconsin, arisgames.org. And the URL is at the top. It's kind of small. My apologies. In ARIS Games, what you can do is you build on a web-based platform. You can use JavaScript. You can do fancy things if you want, or you can enter text, locations, and pictures. If you can attach an image and type in text, you could build something. What happens then is that automatically transfers to the mobile, in this case iOS only right now. Our center's working on building out the Android version for them because we found we need it. But then it shows up. We're using this in two ways. One, you can do it as teachers if you want to sort of mess around with it. There's tons of resources. That would be an 8-hour talk just showing you how to do it, but it's not impossible and not as hard as you might think. The hard part is the learning experience. Again, tools are just tools, right? The other piece is that learners themselves are building with these tools, and that is the really cool part. And I'll talk about that when we get to the third piece of this, which is design. There are lots of also commercial scavenger hunt applications available if you're interested in place-based augmented reality type. We actually have used Yelp specifically with Spanish speakers to look at all the taco trucks all over Oregon, which is a big deal, right? The same would be true in many cities. You can use something like Squarespace. There's other ones. Foursquare is another. So there's lots of different places that you can think about how place works. TripAdvisor would be another one you could use right off the shelf. But the key is using that to create the kind of experiences you want your learners to have. Go to 5 places, right? Go to this neighborhood, take pictures, and geolocate these different pieces. The second clear pedagogical trend that technology affords us is the opportunity to extend dynamic interaction. And what I mean by extend is, one, across geographical space, so telecollaboration, tandem partnering. You can use chat messages. You can use all kinds of forums, different spaces to do that, but also extending the type of genres of discourse to which we expose our learners. So we're not only saying we're giving you classroom, we're giving you academic, we're saying, look, we're giving you language to live in the world. And this dynamic interaction can happen in a lot of ways. And as we started looking at this, what came really apparent to me is that we can't ignore play. Play, different than fun. Certainly gamification is not what I'm talking about in this way, putting a bunch of badges and points on top of something to make it good. What I'm talking about is creating opportunities in which we get the best types of extended interactions. And so I went back, I was looking, we were talking about some play stuff. I'm like, I gotta look back at Bob. This isn't actually Bob, but essentially this is Bob, a Chinese speaker, out of Liu's original work, republished in Turon and Liu in 1995, who looked at the kind of interactions that happen in 3 different contexts: a teacher-student context, classroom context, a peer-to-peer context in classroom around task, and an in-play context. So at home with the researcher doing games, with parents doing all these kinds of things. And guess what they found? The play context inherently produced more complicated, more quantity of language than any of the other 2 contexts, with a difference between like 260 quantity and structures to 5,000. That is a marked difference in the kinds of things we're looking at. We don't have time to look at that study in particular, but it is strongly indicative of why it's so difficult to create these discourse structures in classroom spaces. It's not where it's naturally occurring. And so one way to enhance time on task, to enhance in effortful engagement, persistence, is to create opportunities for play. And by play, I mean inquiry-based spaces. These are my 2 kids playing at the Children's Museum. And as I was looking for some images, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's exactly a reason we cannot ever get them out of the kitchen space or the grocery store space at the Children's Museum. Why is it? Effortful engagement around a real-world scenario, which to them matters, because when we go to the grocery store, well, they don't always get the food they want, right? So they're trying to think about, how do I negotiate this? And now I am in charge, and I'm doing that. Look at the kind of interaction the 2-year-old has with the 4-year-old. Ella looks up and she says, Lily, stop. I am in charge of my space. There's all kinds of things happening here. What we know more carefully from the research is that play experiences, mostly investigated recently in digital games, but in all kinds of contexts, contribute to really 6 behaviors that are critical as to the next step of building sort of persistence and engagement around the kinds of learning experiences we want to happen. 1, hypothesis testing through event-driven scenarios. People get to try things out and try something a little bit different. I don't know how that'll work. I don't know what's going to go on there. 2, memorization and large amounts of play time. Let's face it, you have to memorize. We memorize all kinds of things without even realizing we've known we've memorized it, right? Language is critical in that space. Risk-taking. Play enables us to risk-take. Has anyone ever played the card game Coup? If you haven't, it's a great game. But essentially, all it is about risk-taking. You have 2 cards, you have to hide them, and then you bluff and take plays. So you either do a play based on a card you actually have, or you get to make a play saying you have this card, right? And so then people can call you on that. No, I don't believe you have that card. And it's about how willing you are to take risks. You usually win Coup by taking calculated risks at key moments, right? You cannot win by only playing the cards you have in your deck. Without risk, you can't win. And so it's a really, really important piece of that process. Tolerance to ambiguity, allowing you to continue even when you have no idea what the outcome is going to be, right? Willingness to figure it out even though you don't actually know. Problem solving and intense, meaningful collaboration with peers and experts, right? Sometimes students don't talk in class so much, right? Sometimes I think it's we're tired and we have a million things going on. Sometimes I think we don't give them things that are that interesting to talk about, right? We want them, we want that to happen, but maybe we kind of start flipping that, and we have the opportunity to do that through different tools. So again, I'll just show you some of those behaviors on the same image, right? So you see hypothesis testing. They're trying to figure out how those gears take. Risk-taking. What happens if they all fall on the floor, which they did, by the way. Meaningful collaboration between the 2 of them. They have no idea I'm there when they're doing this, right? They don't want to play with me. They want to play with each other. Problem solving. Large amounts of playtime. Essentially, Jesse Schell, a game designer, calls this a problem-solving activity approached with a playful attitude, right? And in that attitude, we enable the capacity to do kinds of things that we weren't able to do before. In order to make this more concrete, John Reinhardt and I tried to come up with a model. This is part of the Games to Teach project originally, has been published elsewhere. We tried to come up with a model that would help sort of systematize this for classroom use, right? What does this look like in a program? In my case, I had 60 novice teachers every semester coming in and out. And how do we do something like this in places where I can't be there all the time? It feels easy as a teacher, right? It doesn't feel so easy to implement systematically across the board. And so this model really does exactly what we want them to do. Explore at the top. Observe, right? Observational input, I think is what David called it this morning, right? Noticing, collecting, pay attention to the world in which they're living. Then examining, right? Experiences, in this case we're talking about game discourses, experiencing discourses, analyzing those, figuring it out, and sort of delving into that. And then finally extending that, right? To give reflective creation participation in these game discourses. Maybe that's creating a fan fiction, maybe that's creating an analytical blog post, maybe that's doing all kinds of different things. Right now, we've built these out based on this model. Most recently, this will actually be launched at ACTFL, so anyone going to ACTFL is welcome to come hang out with us and play some games and see how these are. Actually, we have a whole unit of curriculum based on this model for novice, intermediate, and advanced level learners. We're specifically looking at 6 games, actually. These are my 3 favorite, and I brought them here because I wanted to sort of make a point. One is Plague Inc. It is essentially you're the CEO of a disease company, and to make money, you have to create the most deadly disease possible. It's essentially a science game to teach kids how disease works, right? But what we've done is we put it actually in our Star Talk Swahili program a couple of years ago to have them think about why disease actually starts in Africa often, and what those variables are, and how they sort of stop it and start it, and what they can do in those places. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do with this around these deep, meaningful problem-solving issues. Ingress, does anyone in here play Ingress? Man, I'm so surprised. 7 million people all over the world playing Ingress. It's quite a fun place-based augmented reality game. But essentially, it's an app, a game free, that allows you to look at cultural things around campus. I didn't look today. I haven't had time this morning to see where the portals are. But it's things of historical significance, cultural significance, and essentially it's social mapping of the things that are going on. And so and it can be played in 35 languages. And so helping learners sort of explore these target languages and places that people deem to be important in the space in which they're living. Finally, this War of Mine. I should warn you, this has a couple of screens that feel fairly provocative, so you should always play before you put them in, but don't be put off by that at first, and I think you'll see that it's worth exploring. It's essentially survival after a war by civilians and what it looks like. So when we're talking, if someone was saying they're teaching a class on the refugee crisis next semester, this morning, wherever he is. And so this would be the kind of thing that allows learners to explore the true complexity in those places. All of this is freely available on Games to Teach. It's our site designed for teachers. Right now, there's a bunch of curricular activities you can download and work with anytime. But you'll see a lot more of that coming as things are working on those pieces. If you're working with another game, let us know. We'd love to feature your work. Again, the idea is to not work in silos and make collaboration happen. Good? See everyone still writing? I'll wait a minute. All right, the last key pedagogical transformation, and this probably is the most far out there, but is using design itself as a learning tool. So instead of having learners play games or use curriculum or do things, actually having them themselves design and create those tasks. This is a mural actually outside a sandwich shop, me doing my Mario jump. I couldn't help it. But the whole idea is they designed this, and then people and users themselves design the experience around it. This wall has a little path. It's a huge mural, and anyone play Mario? Yeah, so you know what this means, right? That growing mushroom. And so we have all kinds of pictures in local culture, people riding Yoshi, right? Doing all of these different pieces. And essentially the experience with this interactive art is what it is designed by the users themselves. The painter of the mural didn't have a whole set of things people in the community should do with it, right? Instead, they put it up there and said, hey, let's try some things. Our newest game, EcoPod, does both. So what we do in EcoPod, our first module, and this is just in its first year, so it's just been in the classroom now about 5 weeks. In EcoPod, it's a game put in an academic residential hall where we have learners who live in immersive floors on 5 different languages: Chinese, Japanese, French, German, and Spanish. And they are tasked, in this case, with surviving a pandemic. Why did we choose pandemic survival? Well, the first year common reading for all freshmen, all first-year students coming into the University of Oregon is called Station 11. Great read if you haven't read it, but we wanted them to experience that novel, 1, in a different way, and 2, from a language learning global perspective. So we built it out in English. They have to survive in English. Then we directly translated that game into their 5 target languages, so they have to delve through what that looks like. Now, over the course of the term, what we're doing is they actually have to redesign the narrative from a culturally appropriate perspective based on sort of key touchstone objectives we know are critical in intermediate, sort of advanced level language skills. Let me give you an example. One is a space at the very beginning, day 1 of the pandemic, where someone comes to their room, a hazmat person or a residence hall, and says, hurry, you have to get out of your room, right? There's this global flu and you need to evacuate. And at that moment, the player has a choice. They either get to stay or go. And so what we do in the class then is the wraparound is, well, could you do that if you were in Beijing? Could you have the choice to stay or go if you were in Germany? Could you have the choice to stay or go? And those choices intimately affect the language we're learning, right? They decide, they help you understand community and make pragmatic choices. Another one is around resource collection, around news media. What counts as trustworthy news and what doesn't? In our game, we have a news clip, and so we help them decide, does this feel trustworthy, does it not? What would it be like? Who would you trust? And what if you were in Latin America? What news would you trust? Where would you go for your sources? And so through that, then we introduce them to social media that matters. We introduce them to the news sources that are varied across every culture and place in these 5 particular languages, right? We talk about how that's different in the Francophone world depending on if you're in Canada, Africa, or France, and what are those pieces? And learners themselves then are tasked with designing a new narrative to be pragmatic and culturally reflective. Would I say the first time out it's been awesome? I wish I could stand up here and tell you this is the best thing we've ever done. The data is really clear. What we know with any kind of innovation is that's not always the case, right? Our biggest hurdle has actually been learners saying, yeah, but this doesn't get me ready for my test. But, right, this doesn't help me with, and so it makes me really think about what we're doing in language classrooms. And we're really excited. We have all kinds of modifications. It's why we do iterative design. It's why we put curriculums in as soon as possible. We don't wait till they're built and seemingly perfect, because it doesn't matter. It has to be authenticated by those learners anyway, right? And so what we're finding, though, is the idea to wrestle with these issues really matters to them. They come to class, they're excited about the issues. How that works with the technology is sort of tangential, right? It's important, but it's not as important as the learning that we're hoping is occurring. There's another example, right, the choice I was going to show you. So what does this mean towards the future, and where are we going? At our center, we're really thinking about what the Glass Lab has termed evidence-centered game design, in essence, where we bring together really strong psychometrics and assessment, and we're really trying to understand the learning process, combined with learning in general, what we know about SLA, what we know about language learning, and finally, games themselves, and this idea of really interdisciplinary collaboration to figure out what actually works for the classroom. That's one piece. The other piece is, I'm the rookie and the vet. This was on my Sprite Canada conference I was at a couple weeks ago. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is exactly where we are in digital technologies and language learning. As we have tons of ideas, tons of preparation. There's a lot of work out there. As David mentioned this morning, some of it sort of doesn't isolate variables the way we want them to. It sort of, in the end, points to pedagogy, right? In the end, it always comes back to teaching and learning. And so if we always view ourselves, no matter where we are in our careers, as rookies and as vets, I think we'll start to see these changes happen. And so I really want to encourage you to sort of take risks and pick one. It doesn't mean you do all these things all the time, right? Try it out with one small game or one place-based scavenger hunt or one thing, and see what kind of impact you can see. Those of you who are students in the room, make something, right? Say, for my final project, I really want to build this tour of our campus in Chinese. I really want to get people to explore the history of Thomas Jefferson, and that's what I've been hearing about this morning, right? Local culture. The history of Thomas Jefferson and where all the good and bad happened, and make decisions for, I mean, who knows? There's tons you can do here, right? But take that initiative to do that, because I think you'll be really surprised at what that means long-term for your language learning, right? If we think of a tip of an iceberg, sure, we might give up a little accuracy in terms of a preposition here or an accent there, but that doesn't matter if we're gaining a whole huge piece of this big iceberg, because eventually we're going to get that preposition back in there in the right place, right? Eventually it's going to happen. And I would say I think we'd actually be surprised at how little difference we really see. We don't know that yet. We don't have the data to back that up. We don't have the games. We're just in those places. I sort of joke my last 10 years of my career have been publishing 101 things not to do. Right? No significance. This didn't work. No significance. But every time we learn just a little bit more about what we should be doing. And as long as we don't sort of stop pushing that envelope, I think you'll start to really see how we're co-constructing learning behavior simultaneously with the kinds of thinking and behaviors that are happening in the world today in general.